He was a powerful billionaire CEO who thought he could control every outcome, until his 8-year-old son collapsed in his arms at a glamorous charity gala, and only a mysterious blonde doctor from the crowd could save him. What happened next would change all three of their lives forever. Michael Harrison had always been the kind of man who seemed untouchable. At 40 years old, he was the head of a construction empire that spanned multiple states, employing thousands and shaping skylines. His name was synonymous with precision and power. In boardrooms, his word was law. In negotiations, his presence alone could silence a room. He stood tall at 6'2", with the build of a man who still found time for the gym, despite his crushing schedule. His dark brown hair cut immaculately, and eyes the color of deep chestnut. Steady, unreadable, and often intimidating to those who didn't know him well. His navy suit was tailored so perfectly it looked as though it had been sewn directly onto him. Everything about Michael suggested control, but control was something he'd been losing for years, quietly, privately, behind the closed doors of his life. Since his wife had walked away 5 years earlier, leaving behind nothing but a terse goodbye letter and a custody arrangement, Michael's world had been stripped down to two things: his company and his son, Andrew. The boy, now 8, was the only person who could pull a genuine smile out of him without effort. Andrew had the same sharp features as his father, but carried a lighter energy. Bright blue eyes, hair like spun gold, and a laugh that could soften even Michael's hardest days. Michael was fiercely protective of him. As the sole parent, he made sure Andrew had everything: private schooling, the best medical care, a home that was safe and filled with opportunities. Yet despite all the privileges, Michael worried constantly. He worried about the absence of a mother figure, about whether he was present enough, about the moments he missed when work pulled him away. It was one of the few subjects that could keep him awake at night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, wondering if he was doing enough. That September evening, the city was buzzing with anticipation for a charity gala benefiting children's healthcare programs. Michael's company had been the event's largest sponsor for 3 consecutive years, and it was expected, practically demanded, that he attend. He decided to bring Andrew along, thinking it would be good for his son to see the charitable side of the empire he would one day inherit. The boy was thrilled when Michael surprised him with a miniature version of his own suit. Navy blue, crisp white shirt, tiny silver cufflinks that glinted in the light. As they left the Harrison estate, Michael caught sight of Andrew in the car's window reflection. Small hands smoothing down his tie, an expression of focused excitement on his face. It struck Michael, not for the first time, how quickly his son was growing up. That thought carried with it a mixture of pride and a faint ache in his chest. The hotel hosting the gala was an opulent, historic building with towering columns and warm golden lights spilling onto the marble steps. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with conversation, the clink of glasses, and the subdued strains of a live jazz quartet. Michael shook hands, exchanged polite words with board members and city officials, always keeping one eye on Andrew as the boy explored the edges of the ballroom with curious glances. For a while, everything was perfect. The kind of evening that made Michael feel the effort of balancing his public life and private responsibilities was worth it. But as the night wore on, he noticed Andrew's smile fading. The boy's shoulders slumped slightly. His face seemed paler under the warm light. When Michael stepped closer, he saw the small tremor in his son's hands, the way his breaths came quicker than they should. In that instant, the room's chatter faded into a dull roar in his ears. The confident CEO who could handle anything felt something far more dangerous than uncertainty. He felt fear. And before he could process what was happening, the night that began with elegance and control was about to unravel into chaos. Michael's instincts as a father overrode every social nicety the moment he realized something was wrong. He crouched in front of Andrew, resting one steadying hand on the boy's shoulder, searching his face for answers. "Buddy, are you feeling okay?" he asked, his voice low but tight. Andrew shook his head, his lips pressed together, as if speaking would take too much effort. The background hum of the gala continued, laughter from one corner, a champagne cork popping in another. But for Michael, it felt like the world had narrowed to a tunnel where only his son existed. He could hear the faint irregularity in Andrew's breathing, shallow and quick, and he noticed the sheen of sweat beginning to bead on the boy's forehead. Michael stood, scanning the room, searching for anyone who might help. He caught the attention of a nearby waiter. "Get the event staff, now, and call for a medic," he said sharply. The young man's eyes widened before he rushed off. Guests nearby began to murmur, their eyes following Michael and the small figure of Andrew clinging to his father's arm. "Breathe with me, Andrew," Michael said, kneeling again, trying to keep his voice calm despite the dread curling in his gut. He could feel his son's heartbeat through the small hand gripping his own. It was too fast, hammering as though trying to keep pace with the panic in the room. It was then, through the parting crowd, that she appeared. Emily Carter moved with the kind of purposeful stride that belonged to someone used to stepping into the middle of emergencies. She wore a simple navy dress, her blonde hair tied back, but there was nothing ordinary about the focus in her eyes. Michael noticed the stethoscope case in her hand before she even spoke. "Let me through. I'm a doctor," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the confusion. People shifted aside almost instinctively, sensing authority in her tone. She dropped to her knees beside Andrew, her gaze sweeping over him with practiced speed. "What's his name?" she asked Michael without looking up. "Andrew, 8 years old," Michael replied instantly. "Any medical conditions?" "Number healthy. This just started," Michael said, his voice breaking slightly on the last word. Emily reached for Andrew's wrist, counting his pulse, then gently tilted his chin to check his breathing. "Andrew," she said softly, leaning in so he could see her face, "I need you to look at me, okay? You're doing great. Stay with me." She glanced up at Michael, reading his expression in an instant. "It's going to be okay, but I need space and I need quiet," she said firmly to the surrounding guests. When no one moved quickly enough, she raised her voice. "Now, please!" The authority in her tone was enough to send people stepping back. Emily quickly loosened Andrew's tie and unbuttoned the top of his shirt. She placed her ear close to his chest, listening intently, her brow furrowing. Michael felt a sick twist in his stomach as her hands moved with urgency, checking his airway, signaling for the AED one of the hotel staff had just brought. "His heart rhythm isn't stable," she said quickly, more to herself but loud enough for Michael to hear. "We're not going to wait." Michael's pulse roared in his ears as she positioned the pads on Andrew's small chest, speaking in calm, measured tones to the boy while she worked. "You're strong, Andrew. You've got this." The AED signaled, and Emily followed its instructions with mechanical precision. Michael could barely breathe as the machine delivered the shock. Andrew's body jerked slightly, and for a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a cough, a gasp, and his chest rose with a ragged breath. Relief crashed through Michael so hard he almost fell forward, catching his son in his arms. Emily stepped back just enough to give them space, though her eyes stayed on Andrew, scanning for any sign of relapse. "He's breathing," Michael said, the words more like a prayer than a statement. Emily gave a small nod. "He needs to be in a hospital immediately. I'll ride with you." In that instant, Michael knew he wasn't just looking at the woman who had saved his son's life. He was looking at someone who had just stepped into his world in a way he would never forget. The wail of the ambulance siren cut through the night as the vehicle sped through the city streets, weaving between traffic with an urgency that made every second feel heavier. Michael sat on the narrow bench inside, his knees pressed close to the gurney where Andrew lay, an oxygen mask over his small face. Emily was across from him, her eyes fixed on the heart monitor, her hands steady as she adjusted the IV line. Michael had been in situations that demanded quick thinking and composure, high-stakes negotiations, multi-million-dollar crises, but nothing had ever made him feel as powerless as this. His son's hand rested limply in his own, the warmth there a constant reminder that they were still in the fight. Every shallow rise and fall of Andrew's chest felt like a fragile thread tethering him to the world. Emily glanced up from the monitor. "His heart rhythm has stabilized, but we're not out of the wood," she said in a voice that was calm but firm. "He'll need tests as soon as we get there. This could be a congenital issue or something acute. We won't know until cardiology runs a full workup." Michael nodded, but his mind was spinning, snagging on every possibility she mentioned. "He's never been sick like this before," he said quietly, his voice rough. "He was fine this morning, laughing, talking about the gala. And then," he stopped, swallowing hard. "Sometimes there are no signs until the moment it happens," Emily said, her gaze never leaving the boy. "The important thing is that he's here now, and we're keeping him here. The ambulance jolted slightly as it took a sharp turn, the motion making Michael's stomach knot tighter. He studied Emily in the dim, flickering light of the vehicle, a woman who had appeared out of nowhere in the middle of chaos, who had commanded the situation with a precision and authority that had silenced a room full of people. Her focus hadn't wavered once. When the hospital came into view, Michael felt both relief and fear. The vehicle rolled to a stop, and the rear doors flew open. A team of nurses and doctors was waiting, the white glare of the ER lights spilling into the night. Emily jumped down first, moving with brisk efficiency as she gave a rapid report to the waiting staff. 8-year-old male, sudden onset cardiac instability, defibrillated once, rhythm restored, oxygen and IV in place. No known medical history. Stable for now, but urgent evaluation needed. The gurney was wheeled inside and Michael kept pace at its side, his hand never leaving Andrew's. The bright antiseptic smell of the hospital hit him immediately, along with the clipped voices of medical staff calling orders and the constant beeping of machines. Emily stayed close until Andrew was taken into a treatment room. When the doors swung shut between them, Michael felt a pang of panic, as if part of him had been sealed away. He turned to find Emily standing just a few feet away, her posture still composed, but her expression softening as she met his gaze. "You saved him," Michael said, the words heavy with meaning. Emily shook her head slightly. "I did my job. The team in there will make sure he stays safe now." But Michael didn't believe for a second that it was only about doing her job. He had seen the urgency in her movements, the way her voice had carried in the ballroom, the steady control she had maintained in the ambulance. Without her, his son might not have made it this far. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of exhaustion and adrenaline. "I don't know how to thank you," he admitted. "You don't have to," she replied simply. "Just be here for him." For the next hour, Michael sat in the sterile waiting room, every sound from down the hall making his heart jump. Emily remained nearby, occasionally stepping away to check on the team's progress, always returning with calm updates that steadied him more than she realized. When the double doors finally opened and a doctor waved him over, Michael stood so quickly the chair behind him scraped against the floor. But before following the doctor, he glanced at Emily. "Don't go," he said quietly, almost more like a request than a command. She gave a small nod. "I won't." And in that moment, Michael knew she wasn't just part of the night's events. She was becoming part of something far more important in his life. The hallway leading to the pediatric cardiac unit felt impossibly long. Michael followed the doctor, his polished shoes echoing against the sterile floor, each step a little heavier than the last. He could see Andrew through the small glass panel of the room ahead, still lying on the hospital bed, small against the expansive white sheets, connected to monitors that beeped in steady, rhythmic intervals. Inside, the air was cool and faintly antiseptic, the low hum of machines filling the silence. A nurse was adjusting the IV drip, while another checked the leads attached to Andrew's chest. The sight tightened something deep in Michael's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm for his son's sake. He moved to the side of the bed, resting a careful hand on Andrew's arm. The boy stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering open for just a moment. "Hey, buddy," Michael murmured, bending closer so his voice was low and steady. "You gave me quite a scare tonight." Andrew's lips curved faintly, though he was too tired to speak. Michael brushed his hair back gently, feeling the warmth of his skin under his hand, then straightened as the doctor began to speak. "Mr. Harrison, we've completed the preliminary evaluation," the doctor said, his tone professional but softened by years of delivering difficult news. Andrew experienced a sudden arrhythmia, an irregular heart rhythm, which triggered a brief cardiac arrest. From what you described and from the data we have, it may be a congenital condition that hasn't shown symptoms until now. We'll need to run more tests to determine the exact cause and the best treatment plan. The words hit Michael harder than he expected. Congenital, condition, arrest. They were terms he'd heard before in the abstract, but never tied to his own son. "You're saying this. Was there all along?" he asked slowly. "It's possible," the doctor replied. "Some children live with these conditions undetected until a triggering event occurs. It's also possible it's unrelated to a defect. Viral infections, electrolyte imbalances, and other factors can cause similar events. The important thing is that he was revived quickly and is now stable." That was critical. Michael's eyes shifted toward Emily, who stood near the wall, arms loosely crossed, listening intently. The doctor glanced in her direction. From what I've heard, Doctor, Carter's actions on the scene made all the difference. Emily inclined her head slightly but didn't speak. Michael could tell she wasn't comfortable with praise. Her focus was on Andrew, not on being acknowledged. Will he recover fully? Michael asked, his voice quieter now. With proper treatment and monitoring, yes, the doctor said. But this will require follow-up, possible medication, and lifestyle adjustments. We'll guide you through all of it. When the doctor left to arrange further tests, Michael lingered by the bed, watching Andrew's small chest rise and fall under the soft hospital blanket. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the most reassuring sound he'd ever heard. Emily moved closer, standing beside him. He's strong, she said, her voice quiet but certain. Michael glanced at her, studying her profile in the dim hospital light. So are you, he replied. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. I was just where I needed to be. Right place, right time. He didn't agree, but he didn't argue. If you hadn't been there, his voice trailed off, the unspoken ending heavy in the air. I was there, Emily said firmly, meeting his gaze. And he's here. That's what matters now. They stood in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft hum of the equipment and Andrew's slow, even breathing. Michael realized that in all his years of building an empire, he had never felt so indebted to someone. Not in a transactional way, but in a deeply personal one. Emily had stepped into his life for a matter of minutes and had changed its entire trajectory. When Andrew drifted back into sleep, Michael stepped out into the corridor with her. The hospital lights cast long shadows down the hall, and the faint scent of disinfectant lingered in the air. I don't know if you plan to stay this long, he said, but I'd like you to, at least until we know more. Emily tilted her head slightly. Are you asking as Andrew's father or as Michael Harrison, CEO? He gave the faintest smile. Right now, I'm just a father. She nodded. Then I'll stay. And in that moment, with the quiet hum of the hospital around them, Michael knew this was the beginning of something far more significant than a chance encounter. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Michael had never experienced before, one dictated not by board meetings or market deadlines, but by hospital visiting hours, nurse rotations, and the quiet rise and fall of his son's breathing. He had set up camp in the pediatric cardiac unit, using the small sofa in Andrew's room as his bed, refusing to be more than a few feet away. Emily became a constant presence as well. Though she wasn't officially on duty for Andrew's case, she visited every day, sometimes twice, checking in on him and bringing small comforts. A soft fleece blanket, a children's book she thought he might enjoy, a fresh cup of coffee for Michael when she noticed his eyes growing heavy. She moved through the hospital with ease, exchanging quick words with the nurses, her calm professionalism matched only by her quiet compassion. On the third night, when Andrew was sleeping deeply, and the room was lit only by the dim glow of the monitors, Michael stepped out into the hallway to stretch his legs. He found Emily sitting in the family lounge, a paper cup of tea cradled in her hands. The chairs around her were empty, and the low hum of the vending machine filled the silence. You're still here, he said as he approached. She glanced up, offering a small smile. I told you I'd stay. He sat down across from her, studying her face for a moment. Most people wouldn't, not when they have already done more than anyone could ask. Emily took a slow sip of tea before answering. You're not most people's son, and you're not just some man who got unlucky one night. You're a father who's scared, who would trade everything he has for his kid to be okay. I've seen that look before. Different circumstances, different faces, but the same fear. I don't walk away from that. Michael leaned back in his chair, her words cutting through him more than he expected. I'm not used to people staying without wanting something in return, he admitted quietly. That's a sad thing to be used to, she said, her tone gentle but pointed. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but felt weighted with things neither of them were ready to say. Michael found himself watching the way she cradled the teacup, the steady confidence in her posture, the softness in her eyes when she wasn't actively in doctor mode. Back in Andrew's room later that night, Emily stayed a little longer than usual. She pulled up a chair beside the bed, flipping through the book she'd brought. Andrew, still drowsy, listened with half-lidded eyes as she read in a warm, steady voice. Michael watched from the other side of the bed, the sound of her words weaving into the quiet beeps of the monitors until the boy finally drifted off again. When she stood to leave, Michael walked her to the door. "I don't say this lightly," he told her, his voice low. "You've done more for us in the past few days than I can ever repay. And it's not just about saving Andrew that night. It's about what you've done since." "I notice it." Emily met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "Then I'll keep doing it," she said simply. And with that, she was gone down the hall. Michael returned to his seat beside Andrew, but the image of her walking away stayed in his mind far longer than he expected. It wasn't just gratitude he was feeling anymore. It was something deeper, something that made the sterile hospital room feel just a little less cold. It happened on the fifth night, just when Michael had begun to believe the worst was behind them. The day had been calm. Andrew's vitals were steady. The cardiology team was optimistic, and Emily had even convinced Michael to leave the hospital for an hour to take a shower and eat something real. He'd returned refreshed, ready to settle into another quiet evening by his son's side. But sometime after midnight, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor changed. Michael was dozing lightly in the armchair beside the bed when the sound cut through his haze. A rapid series of beeps, faster than they should have been. He was on his feet instantly, leaning over Andrew. His son's breathing was shallow, his small face pale again, a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. The monitor's pitch rose, an alarm sounding. Michael's pulse spiked. He slammed his hand against the call button, his voice rough with urgency. "I need someone in here now." The door burst open within seconds, a nurse rushing in, followed closely by Emily, still in scrubs, as if she hadn't left the hospital. She moved past Michael without hesitation, eyes locking on the monitor before her hands went to Andrew's wrist to check his pulse. "Arrhythmia's back," she said quickly to the nurse. "Get the crash cart in here now." Michael stepped back only because Emily ordered it, his hands flexing helplessly at his sides. "Emily," she glanced at him, her eyes sharp and focused. "I've got him. Stay close, but let us work." The room became a blur of controlled chaos. Emily calling out orders, the nurse handing her supplies, the steady whine of the monitor underscoring every second. She spoke to Andrew in a firm but calm voice, telling him she was right there, telling him to stay with her. Michael couldn't look away from her hands, precise, confident, and unshaking, even as she prepared the medication to slow his heart rate. "Give me 0.5 milligrams of adenosine," she instructed. The nurse passed it to her, and she administered it with the kind of speed and care that comes from countless nights in emergency rooms. The monitor faltered for a moment, then began to slow. Emily's eyes stayed on the screen until the irregular spikes leveled into a steady rhythm again. The beeping returned to its normal pace. Only then did she exhale, just once, before leaning over to check Andrew's breathing again. "He's stable," she said, and though her tone was even, Michael could hear the relief woven into it. Michael moved back to the bed immediately, brushing a damp strand of hair from his son's forehead. His voice was low, almost reverent. "You just saved him again." Emily straightened, her hands finally still. "We both did. You were here when it started. You called fast." "That's not the same," he said, shaking his head. "You're the reason he's still breathing." The nurse quietly left the room to update the doctors, leaving them alone in the dim light. Emily pulled off her gloves and stood across from Michael, her eyes meeting his in a way they hadn't before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I know it's hard to watch," she said finally, her voice softer now. "But tonight proves something. His body can fight, and you're not alone in this fight." Michael swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'm starting to realize I don't want to be." The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with an understanding they both felt, but didn't name. Emily glanced at Andrew once more, then back at Michael. "He's going to sleep for a while now. You should too." "I will," he said, though he knew he wouldn't. Not yet. He wanted to watch his son breathe, to keep hearing that steady beep, and to hold on to the image of Emily in those moments. Strong, unflinching, and utterly focused on protecting what mattered most. And somewhere deep inside, Michael understood that his feelings for her had shifted again. This wasn't just gratitude anymore. This was the beginning of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long, long time. The morning after the scare, the hospital room felt different. The air wasn't heavy with the constant edge of panic, but lighter. cautiously so. Andrew was still pale, but his breathing was steady, and the heart monitor kept its calm, rhythmic beeping. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the bed. And for the first time in days, Michael allowed himself to believe they were moving toward recovery. Emily arrived early, wearing a soft gray sweater instead of her usual scrubs, a cup of coffee in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. "Breakfast," she announced quietly so as not to wake Andrew. "You look like you haven't eaten anything that didn't come from a vending machine in a week." Michael took the coffee with a half smile, noticing how natural it felt to see her walk into the room. "That's probably accurate," he admitted. She pulled a chair closer to the bed, her attention shifting immediately to Andrew. "How's our patient?" "He's been sleeping most of the night," Michael said, glancing at his son. "No alarms, no surprises." Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly. "That's exactly what we want." She leaned over, brushing her fingers gently over Andrew's hair. It was such a simple gesture, but Michael felt something twist in his chest watching her, a quiet tenderness that wasn't part of any job description. Later that morning, when Andrew woke, Emily coaxed him into eating a few bites of oatmeal and sipping water. She made a game out of it, pretending each spoonful was part of a race to make him stronger. By the time the nurse came in to check his vitals, Andrew was smiling faintly, his small voice stronger than it had been in days. Michael stepped back, letting Emily take the lead, and found himself studying her again. She wasn't just treating him like a patient. She was treating him like a person she cared about, and Andrew responded to that. He trusted her. In the afternoon, Emily suggested they take Andrew for a short walk down the hallway, monitors and IV pole in tow. Michael hesitated, worried it might be too soon, but she reassured him with the kind of confidence that left no room for doubt. "Movement will help him," she explained, "and it'll remind him that he's still capable, even after what happened." So together, they guided Andrew slowly down the hall, Michael on one side, Emily on the other. The boy's small hand alternated between gripping his father's and holding on to Emily's. Nurses smiled as they passed, and Michael couldn't help but notice how the three of them must look like a family. Back in the room after Andrew had drifted off again, Michael and Emily found themselves sitting by the window. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace. Cars, buses, people hurrying along the sidewalks. Inside, time felt suspended. "You've been here every day," Michael said after a pause. "Not just for the emergencies, but for everything else." "Why?" Emily glanced out the window before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be in a hospital room, waiting for someone you love to get better. And because," she hesitated, her voice softer now, "because I care, not just about Andrew. About both of you." Her words caught him off guard, but they settled into him like something that had been waiting to be said. "I care too," he admitted, "more than I expected to." Their eyes met, and the quiet between them shifted. It wasn't the tense silence of strangers or the guarded stillness of two people keeping their distance. It was something warmer, heavier, filled with the beginnings of trust and something more. When Emily finally left that evening, Michael stood at the window for a long time, watching her walk across the parking lot, and he realized that the thought of her not coming back tomorrow felt wrong. He didn't want her to just be part of Andrew's recovery. He wanted her to be part of their lives. Discharge day arrived with a quiet sense of anticipation that Michael hadn't felt in years. The pediatric ward was unusually bright, the spring sunlight spilling across the polished floors as if it, too, was celebrating Andrew's release. The doctors had cleared him after a final round of tests, satisfied that the medication was working and his heart rhythm had stabilized. Still, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was more than just the end of a hospital stay. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Andrew sat on the edge of his bed in his sneakers and a fresh t-shirt, his hospital bracelet still dangling loosely from his wrist. He was grinning, but there was a trace of shyness there too, as if he didn't quite believe he was really going home. Emily had arrived earlier that morning, helping him pack the few things that had made his room feel less sterile. A blanket, a couple of books, the toy car Michael had brought to keep him company. She moved around the room with quiet efficiency, but her every glance toward Andrew carried a warmth that Michael couldn't stop noticing. When the nurse came in with the discharge papers, Michael handled the signatures while Emily crouched beside Andrew, explaining in simple terms how important it was to follow the doctor's instructions at home. It's just like training for a game, she told him with a smile. You take care of yourself now so you can play harder later. Andrew nodded solemnly, clearly taking her words to heart. Walking out of the hospital together felt surreal. The automatic door slid open, and the crisp air met them, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Andrew squinted against the sunlight, and Michael couldn't help but laugh softly. Feels good, doesn't it? He asked. Yeah, Andrew said, his hand slipping naturally into his father's. Michael glanced to his other side where Emily walked in step with them. She didn't seem in a hurry to leave, and he found himself hoping she wouldn't. They drove back to the Harrison estate in a comfortable silence, Andrew dozing in the back seat. When they pulled into the driveway, Michael caught Emily looking at the house, not with the awe of someone impressed by wealth, but with the curiosity of someone imagining what it might feel like to belong there. Inside, the staff greeted Andrew with genuine warmth, offering hugs and words of welcome. Emily stayed close as Michael showed his son to the living room, where a soft blanket and his favorite snacks had been prepared. Andrew settled onto the couch, his eyelids already drooping again, and within minutes he was asleep. Michael led Emily out onto the terrace, where the late afternoon sun painted the garden in shades of gold. For a long moment, they just stood there, listening to the faint sound of birdsong, the air between them filled with unspoken things. I've been trying to figure out how to say this, Michael began, his voice quieter than usual. You've been here through the worst moments of my life. You didn't have to be, but you stayed. You didn't just save Andrew, you saved me too, in ways I don't think you realize. Emily's expression softened, her lips parting slightly as if to respond, but he continued. I've built a life around control, around never needing anyone. And then you walked in, and everything changed. You've become part of us, and I don't want to lose that. She took a step closer, the sunlight catching in her hair. I didn't plan for any of this either, she admitted. But you and Andrew, somehow you feel like home. Michael reached for her hand, his fingers closing gently around hers. Then stay, not just for today or tomorrow. Stay in our lives. For a heartbeat, she only looked at him, and then she smiled, small, genuine, and full of something he recognized as the beginning of love. I will, she said simply. They stood there as the sun dipped lower, the house behind them quiet, Andrew sleeping peacefully inside. For the first time in years, Michael felt the rare, grounding certainty that he wasn't facing the future alone. He had his son, and now he had her. And together, they were something more than any title or fortune could ever define. It wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of a life they hadn't even dared to imagine. In my view, the ending of this story is the kind that stays with you long after you close the book. It's not just about survival, it's about transformation. Michael begins as a man defined by control, power, and self-reliance. Yet the ordeal with Andrew forces him to face the one thing he can't fix with influence or money: the fragility of life. Emily's role isn't simply that of a savior in a dramatic moment. She becomes the steady presence who reminds both father and son that true strength is built on trust and connection. By the time they leave the hospital, it's clear that she's not filling a gap temporarily. She's part of a new foundation for their future. What I love about this ending is that it doesn't feel like a fairy tale dropped out of reality. It feels earned. The bond between them grows from shared fear, long nights, and small acts of care, not instant romance. When Michael asks her to stay, it's not a grand gesture for show, but a deeply personal commitment. To me, this is a story about how life can blindside you with both heartbreak and hope, sometimes in the same night, and how the people who walk in during your darkest hours can become the very ones you can't imagine living without.